In a few days, this recording will appear on the website. Thanks to Sandy. And here we go for the fourth day of the fourth month, 2022. So I think we'll be paying a lot of attention today to the general subject of war. Given what's going on in the world right now in the way of warfare, maybe we should start with a moment of silence. Now, one of the things that I've proposed is that to understand our propensity for going to war, we can see it as a reenactment of endless wars that humanity experienced under and for our Anunnaki lords. So one of the things we'll do tonight is to actually detail a period of about 1,500 years that I was able to put together a detailed history of the entanglement of rulership, family relations, and wars, to see how it actually played out in that time. The period from approximately 3,760 BCE, which was the founding of the first capital city after the flood, which was around 7,000 years after the flood. We can talk about that span of time, until the nuclear attack on the spaceport in the Sinai and the 5 cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's have an overview about how this has stuck with us, this propensity to go to war with each other. I'm reading right now from the chapter on the human condition in Evolution Diverted. So humanity, observed as a unified entity, functions like a person in trauma. We're violent, impulsive, self-destructive, amnesic, and both unresponsive and overreactive. We're a species in trauma. In fight, nations go to war. In flight, cultures escape reality with diversions. And in freeze, societies stay inactive in the face of approaching crises. Humanity has been operating in trauma for the entire time for which we have records. Now, what could have taken a neural system, evolved to protect life, and made it into a source of suffering? Now, when a person's in trauma has no knowledge of its cause, clinicians look for look for clues to the cause in the person's actual behavior. So like a girl who was sexually abused may marry an abuser or become a prostitute, and that's a clue to what went on that she no longer remembers. So we start with if we start with humanity's most destructive behavior, war, and you say, how would that be related to the origin of our traumatic behavior? It's obvious when we think about it, the wars of the gods. Battling with swords, spears, and arrows, produces the highest possible level of autonomic activation. And endless warfare kept returning the soldiers to that intense state. Through contagion, trauma spread from the warriors to their families and to the whole community. And the activation of trauma moved from the battlefields to all spheres of human life. People who together have been through terrifying trials form intense lasting bonds. It's the trauma bond. And as a form of attachment, it has an addictive quality. It's both traumatizing and soothing. Fighting for the lofty ones produced an especially intense trauma bond because a warrior's killing rage was fused with the love for his God. These were circuits that were never meant to be integrated, but they became so in the crucible of war. Glorious sanctified sacrifice in battle became a virtue. In the artificial battles in the gladiators, they would cry out, "Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you." When Egypt's Islamist president was being overthrown, one of his followers said to a journalist a line that got flashed around the world. It was, to die for God is the most glorious of all things. Now we develop the love of war and a longing for the kinship of battle. The strong feelings of love and rapture arising in the context of war have been extensively written about. There was one of our generals, I can't remember who it was, maybe who was in a press conference not too long ago, and basically he said he felt sorry for all the civilians who had not experienced the intensity of he didn't call it love, but the intensity of devotion that warriors feel to each other. Problem is, the warrior becomes bonded not just to his fellows, but to the unit, to the insignia, to the branch of service, and to war itself. The bond with war is addressed by Ed Tick, who's a clinical psychologist, recently retired from an organization that he ran called Soldier's Heart, which was what they called combat PTSD in the Civil War, Soldier's Heart. After telling how war and divinity were intertwined in antiquity for Hebrews and Greeks and later for Norsemen, Tick shows that we never fully turn away from war because we believe the divine is at the center of it. He observed that war is never solely about its alleged specific causes, that there's a force that draws us into its cosmic arena. In an altered state of awareness, we serve the Lord of hosts, as in the Bible, although, by the way, the translation of Lord of hosts is probably more accurately Lord of armies or Lord of battalions. So it's been dumbed down a little bit for the modern world. but serve the Lord of hosts, or Krishna, or Ares, or a transcendent principle, substituting for a divinity. Principles such as racial purity or the rights of man, justifying violence. He says that war is not that war is not the last resort of sane people. It's not the exception, but it's the rule, with 14,600 wars within 6,000 years of written history. Now, he wasn't thinking about living gods fomenting real wars that our ancestors were pawns in. He was thinking of mythical wars between mythical gods existing only in our ancestors' minds. He was someone who had his hand on the pulse of what was going on, but since he had really no way of knowing that the gods once were flesh and blood, real beings, he kind of deducing backwards, saying, well, mankind was serving mythical gods, you know. We're able to root the history more solidly in actuality rather than in fantasizing. He thought that the gods existed only in our ancestors' minds, and that fictional wars somehow became later fused with real wars. He journeyed back in time when warfare and worship operated in unison, and intuited that our fatal bonding to war was rooted in our attachment to a violent divine. Intuition told him that for the first civilized humans, the gods were quite real, emotionally and spiritually. Mesopotamian tale, as we understand it, reveals that in addition, they were real physically. Now, he was not the only one to do this. Another one that I know about, and there may have been others who put it together up to the point of acknowledging the reality of the original so-called gods. That was Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher. And he also sensed the connection between war and the gods. In 1959, he wrote that war appears to be the only solution to differences between nations because, this is a quote, one nation's gods are in conflict with those of others, and there's no authority by which the claims of these rival divinities can be adjudicated. He used the word, Isaiah Berlin used the word gods and divinities to stand metaphorically for a nation's values and traditions and interests. He went further in an essay on fascism and said that wars will not cease, however hateful, because wars are not a human invention. They are divinely instituted. So intuition led Berlin as well as Tick, back to the point of connection that now we can cement by saying, well, yeah, and the gods were real. So we'll go into some of the, some of the actual history. So let's see, page 315. So the deluge connected with the passage of Nibiru was about 11,000. If we go by the king list, it was actually 11,356 BCE. The rise in sea level attributed, hi Linda, the rise in sea level attributed to the Younger Dryas event around 11,000, so it's around the same time. And then over the next maybe 8,000 years, the human population starts to rebuild, getting to several times 100,000 people around the world. Hi. So we'll come back in to the story in detail in, let's say, year 3760 BCE. Now, shortly before then, cities had begun to be rebuilt over the ruins of the buried ones in Uruk, Eridu, the very first settlement, Eridu meaning home in the far away in Sumerian, and Nippur, the city that we know now as Nippur, but then it originally was Ibriki, which is the crossing point of Earth to Nibiru. It was a spaceport, Ibriki. So in 3760 BCE, according to the king lists, An visits the Earth. This is one of the passages of Nibiru through the inner solar system. Re-gifts kingship to the colony, gives it to mankind this time. Initiates the calendar in Ibriki, which is the same calendar that the Jews use today. It's very, very little changed from the original calendar of Ibriki. And Kish becomes the first capital. So as we go through this history, it's a history that that is pretty much in agreement with the standard history of this period, with one big exception. You know, in the standard accounts, the kings and priests maneuvered for power and riches, using mythical deities to validate their rule over gullible populations. That's the standard story. Okay, understandable, because until now, no one has been able, you know, to see otherwise, and been watching what happened then, you know, through the lens of events that that took place after the lofty ones were gone. You know, when civic and religious authorities really did use unseen gods to help maintain obedience and cohesion, and to obscure their own selfish purposes. That's what happened later. So that scholars have no way of knowing that in this period that we're going to talk about, the gods were totally real and were firmly in charge. These events, so we're going to talk about these events between about 3760 BCE and 2024, which is the date of the nuclear war, and you might say the beginning of the end for Anunnaki rule, because that was 2024 was that nuclear bombardment, and in 556, around 1500 years later, Nibiru comes back, and apparently the last of the Anunnaki leave. Except for Marduk, who I think we'll talk about a bit. He dies in his city of Babylon, according to the Greeks, and is buried in his ziggurat, which hasn't been excavated yet. So Kish is rebuilt and becomes Sumer's first capital. And if there's a map in the book, if you want to follow any of this, but Kish is towards the south. Let's see. Map is on page 8. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Kish is in the middle of Mesopotamia, well north of Eridu. So it's made the capital. Then the next city to dominate is Babili, gateway of the lofty ones. In English, Babylon. Okay. And it's the next, and then Marduk, who's the eldest son of Enki. He claims the right to rule in Babili, leaves Egypt, where he's known as Ra, the god Ra, and launches a coup in Babylon around 3500 BCE. Without authorization, he prepares to build an elevated platform to use to launch spacecraft. And that's in violation of the traditions and standards of the high gods. And for that, he's expelled from Mesopotamia and returns to Egypt. This is probably the basis for the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. And both are projects meant to reach heaven. And both are projects that result in punishment for the pride that drove the projects. Now in Egypt, now here's where we get into how the wars worked with the family issues. This is very typical. He encounters his younger brother Dumuzi, who's the youngest of the sons of the 7 sons of Enki, whose marriage to Inanna Marduk had opposed. Inanna being a great-granddaughter of An, the king of Nibiru, and her name, Inanna, that epithet, she has several names, but that epithet means beloved of An. So Marduk opposed that marriage because it linked his father's clan with the clan of Enlil, An's grandson. No, An's son, I'm sorry. Inanna's grandfather. So the tension between those 2 sons of Enki ignites when Inanna campaigns for admission to the pantheon of the 12 high gods. So she starts this campaign. It enrages Marduk, and a war breaks out between Marduk and his younger brother. So that's within one clan. The conflict with Marduk causes Ningishzida, another of the 5 of the brothers, to leave his African domain. It's not clear why that happens, but the war is going on in Africa. The connection of Africa to Mexico is suggested by the huge heads of in the Olmec, in the pre-Aztec culture of the Olmecs, the huge heads that are clearly African heads, African features. Anyway, Dumuzi wants a son who'd inherit his rank and wealth, but his marriage to Inanna has failed to produce an heir. Under the Anunnaki rules of marriage and inheritance, he could accomplish his wish by fathering a son with his wife's sister. When his sister-in-law refuses his advances, he forces himself on her with Inanna's foreknowledge. Okay, so he is seized, put on trial. He escapes with the aid of Inanna's twin brother, Shamash, who's the god of the sun and the god in charge of rocketry. Dumuzi's rape of his sister-in-law gives Marduk an excuse to move against him again. So war breaks out again. This time Dumuzi is seized and escapes. He's killed in the ensuing mess, and Inanna vows revenge against Marduk. Marduk goes into hiding. He's caught. Inanna attacks the structure in which Marduk is confined, intending to kill him. So there's that battle going on for a while. Inanna's great-grandfather, An, convinces Inanna to desist and have Marduk put on trial. He's sentenced to remain entrapped in a way that so that he'd eventually die. There's evidence that that's in one of the pyramids of Giza. And his son arrives and appeals to Inanna. Dumuzi's actual killer is found. Ninmah, the sister of Enlil and Enki, both, negotiates an agreement. Nergal replaces Marduk as Enki's rightful heir, and Marduk accepts another exile to Egypt. His condition for agreeing is that his precinct in Babylon remains hallowed ground. So you see how thick this is getting, because the proclamation depriving Marduk of his birthright as the eldest son his father, Enki, was also the firstborn, and he was similarly wronged by being denied the primacy on the rule of earth early in the life of the colony. So that creates a rivalry between Nergal, who replaces him as the one who's going to inherit the father's rights. Rivalry between Nergal and Marduk, and that's a key factor in the nuclear war against Marduk, which basically wipes out the Anunnaki rule over most of Mesopotamia. So family matters, warfare, totally intertwined over these 1,500 some odd years. I'm not sure we'll be able to carry to detail all of this time, but we'll see how far we get. Inanna, she's now a widow. She returns to Africa, intending to use the Anunnaki code of inheritance in a very similar way. Just as Dumuzi tried to do, she plans to conceive an heir for Dumuzi's rank and wealth by union with Dumuzi's brother, Nergal. Okay. Now, this enrages her sister, Erishkigal, who's Nergal's wife. She has Inanna seized and executed. Her body is hung on a stake. Now, whether this is an accurate depiction of Anunnaki medical science, don't know. But what we're told in the tablets is that she's brought back to life when Enki sends android emissaries immune to the death rays guarding her body, and they bring her back to Enki's residence in Eridu. She appeals to An, and she's proclaimed goddess of the third region, which was set up after the flood. And that's the valley of the Indus in Africa, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. She's also given authority in what becomes the next capital of Sumer, Uruk, or Erech in the Bible, where a shrine to An is built. Okay. Replacing Ninmah, Anna is brought into the pantheon of the 12, because there were always 12 ruling gods, 6 male, 6 female. So if one steps aside, another one takes the place. And that is the origin of the magical power of 12 in human society ever since, whether it be inches in a foot or shillings in a pound, or roses in a bunch, or the number of apostles, or the tribes of Israel, or hours in half the day, or did I say roses in a bunch? Yeah. Months in the year, you know. So whenever we think of 12, somehow it feels good. 12 is a nice number. It feels good. Good to have 12 of something. And that's because it always brings back a memory of the 12 ruling gods. That's very deep. Anyway, she's assigned Ninmach's zodiacal sign, Virgo, and Ninmach's planet, which is Venus.
Mike, can I just ask a quick question
Yeah.
related to the 12 thing? Is there any chance the Anunnakis had 6 fingers on each hand?
Why do you ask?
Isn't that an interesting question? Why do I ask? I don't exactly know, but I've started doing things with replicas of 6, and it feels familiar. And a lot of things come in like 360 degrees. And I mean, when you start looking at where the six is everywhere in our systems, and that's why, basically, it just feels, something about it feels familiar.
Well,
So that's why I was asking.
Well, it's 12, and I mean 60 was the base, the numerical base in their math, in their arithmetic, and 60 was the highest rank in their society. King An was a 60, and I think Enlil was a 50, and Enki had to make do with 45, I think. So 60 was a powerful number for them, and I'm not sure how it arose, but Nibiru's orbit was 3,000, was a multiple of 60. It was 3,600 of their original days, you know, or of the of the original days. So you might want to look up, there may still be remnants of the Duodecimal Society. The Duodecimal Society was a group, if they still exist, that thought that 12 would be a much better number for our mathematical system than 10, because it's such a it's much handier arithmetically. They may still exist. There's somewhat to the right of the Flat Earth Society, I think, but so you're wondering if they may be the origin of the genes for polydactyly, having 6 fingers. Okay, I think if they had 6 fingers, it would be mentioned, and it would be a much more common trait in us now. So I think the one-word answer to that is no, but it came in with 60. Now 60 was the basis of their standard system of calculation, but I think it can be pretty awkward. So they had another system of 20. So the 60s are with us, like 360 degrees and 60 minutes in an hour. And the 20 system is also still with us. 4 score, that's 4 times 20. Okay, and it's a remnant of the 20 in French. To say 80, you say 80, you say 4 20s. Anyway, the system of base 20 was dumbed down to base 10, which was then passed on to the Assyrians, passed that on to the Arabs, and that became the basis for Western arithmetic, you know, when Arabic numbers came in. And the Arabic numbers, by the way, are very interesting, because if you look at the original Arabic numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're actually drawn with 1 stroke, 2 strokes, 3 strokes, 4 strokes. 8 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 strokes. Anyway, but that, so the 10 comes from 20, 20 comes from 60, and 60 comes from on. Okay. Getting back to the history, Uruk falls, the capital, and Ur becomes the new capital. And there's a period of rapid transfers of power, so pretty constant warfare. And kingship switches between Ur, Kish, Uruk, and 5 other cities. I'm not sure which ones they were. And Enlil is, in this time, is expressing disgust with the goings on of the lesser gods, lesser to him, you know, and the humans. Inanna falls in love with the human, and with his help ends the turmoil, and they build the first Mesopotamian empire, Akkad, which has its own language, Akkadian. He is Shah Khan the Great, who we know as Sargon. And this empire gets coalesced around 2400 BCE. The realm stretches eventually from the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, all the way to the far shore of the Persian Gulf. Akkad, the capital city, is exalted, and Shah Khan is given many honorific names. And Inanna's name in Akkadian is Ishtar, which is the basis for Esther. Okay, so the era of Ishtar is proclaimed, and she appoints her daughter to be the high princess in Ur. Now, Akkad in the Akkadian language means united. So it was a descriptive adjective. It was united, which then became a noun and became Akkad. In the same way that the United States of America eventually became a noun, United States of America. But Akkad simply meant united. So Shah Khan conquers the first region of the gods. After the flood, and the colony had to be organized, the first region was Mesopotamia, and that was given to Enlil and his sons. The second region was Africa, and the northern part, Egypt, was given to Marduk, and the other sons of Enki had the rest of Africa. And the fourth region the third region was India, the Indus Valley, later given to Inanna. And the fourth region was set aside and not given to any of the high gods, other than Ninmach, who was meant to provide neutrality because she was linked to both Enki and Enlil. She was half sister to both. So Shah Rukh Khan conquers the domain of the three sons of Enlil, but he avoids Babylon, with the city of Marduk. He leaves that intact. And he respects the neutrality of the fourth region, known as Tilman, in the Sinai. Sarikhan enters Babylon, though, and he takes some soil from Marduk's sacred precinct to use in building his own launch, well, actually, Inanna's launch platform outside Akkad. Marduk is enraged. He finds this intrusion a sacrilege, and he doesn't want Inanna to have a launch platform. So for somehow the launch platform was had something sacred about it because it was going into the heavens from there. So it wasn't just a building or a structure. It had meaning, and that was intolerable to him. So he returns from Egypt and makes war on the Akkad Empire. Then some of the cities rebel. They go over to Marduk's side. Inanna enters the fight because she's renowned as a warrior and a pilot. She's shown often in fighting gear with weapons. Much blood is shed. Other gods join her, but they're unable to defeat Marduk. Now, the gods hope that Nergal can persuade his brother Marduk to give up his assault on Akkad. So he journeys from Africa, where he has a domain, and promises Marduk that if he returns to Egypt, he'll protect his interests in Babylon, where devices are located that control the region's vital functions, like water distribution. Marduk returns to Egypt because it would enable him to obtain certain objects of power there, and he accepts the offer. But Nergal doesn't live up to his promise. The control systems are neglected. Havoc results in Mesopotamia. The nobles blame Marduk, and they destroy his palace in Babylon. Nergal and Inanna form an alliance, creating a new link between the two clans. Inanna reinvigorates her rule in Akkad. She leads brutal battles with the assistance of Naram Sin, who's grandson to Sarikhan. Okay, so you see, the gods like Inanna, they live much, much longer. Here she is, hooking up, so to speak, with the grandson of her former lover. Okay. So she re-expands the Akkadian Empire, but hers is not the usual sort of campaign, with one god aiming to conquer the city of another. This appears later with Marduk's campaign, but this is the first one of this type. She aims to rule over all the gods. So she seizes the spaceport in Lebanon and conquers cities in Canaan, including Jerusalem and Jericho, which is dedicated to her father Nannar, the god of the moon, in Akkadian known as Sin. And Sinai is probably named for the god Sin. Jericho, in Hebrew means moon city, named for Nannar, god of the moon. She aims to take over. She kind of, you might say, she gives feminism a bad name because it's a really brutal campaign that she begins. Now she has Nergal's support, so she invades Egypt, and she passes through Tilman, violating its neutrality. That's the spaceport that was built that survived the flood because it was so far inland in the Sinai. Now, Nana's getting very grandiose, so now Sin proclaims himself king of the 4 regions, you know. So she intends to be queen of all the gods, and he's going to be king of all the civilized earth. He loots and defiles Enlil's holy precinct in Nibriki, which has been Enlil's seat of power since the founding of the colony hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Okay. Inanna's power and influence grows immense. The other gods watch this with dismay, and they call a council and decree her arrest. They strip Inanna's temple in Akkad of her symbols and weapons. She evades capture and hides for 7 years, probably under the protection of Nergal. Then Inanna resumes her efforts to overthrow the existing order. She aims still to become Queen of Queens. And she seizes the house of An, her great-grandfather in Uruk, and destroys the symbols of his authority. She desecrates the sanctuary of Enlil, her grandfather, in Nibriki. And Enlil and Ninurta gather an army, Enlil and his son, Ninurta, gather an army in the mountains and counterattack. They flatten the center of Inanna's worship and power, Akkad, lay a curse on it. Inanna is then sheltered in Ur by her parents, Nana and Ningal. Akkad is the only capital city that's ever destroyed and not rebuilt, and it's the only one that's not been found. So the curse did a very good job. It's going to be an interesting one if it ever does reappear. We don't know exactly where it was.
Can I just throw out one little thing? These people don't sound like people that I want to hang around.
That you want to
hang around. I mean, what I hear with these stories leading up to or coming after nuclear war or whatever,
leading up
is
to
this. Oh, this is still leading up to this. Is
yeah.
And the nuclear war was when 2000 BC.
2024, according to the King lists.
So, but what I'm hearing is a very unevolved species that gave rise to us, and we're doing exactly what they did. Is that right? Am I interpreting this correctly?
That's what I get, and they are, obviously evolved to technically. They've got spaceships and they fly around. They have beam weapons and all, but they operate like traumatized people.
Gangsters.
Yeah. And doing what gangsters do, accumulating wealth, but the wealth is as much for status as it is for luxury, and the only
function of any sort.
And the only practical value for the wealth is to support the army to beat up the other army.
Right. Right. So we come by it honestly, huh?
We very much do.
It's depressing. I mean, we're talking about something that's gone on for how many 100,000 years? It just, sorry.
However, we have another tradition. We have another, we have an unspoiled parentage, in Homo erectus, to the extent that can be revived, and it lives on in the unbroken indigenous peoples. And it's been trying to show itself up, show up in civilization in the liberal democratic tradition, ever since the cities of Greece. It's been trying to come forward, trying to emerge, and you could say, well, it's getting a little bit better slowly, but at least it hasn't been totally wiped out. There's good basis for pessimism and good basis for optimism. Now, okay, so instigated by Inanna's ambition, Enlil, his forces overrun the Akkadian Empire, despoiling all the cities, except Lagash, and I don't know why that's spared, and Ibriki, which is Enlil's city, his own city. Okay, and he proclaims Ninurta as his successor and grants him rule over Lagash. This is 2200 BCE. Okay, so the nuclear war is coming not too much longer after this. Ninurta's rule is graced by his widely adored wife, Bao. And there's a very telling lament over one of the cities in southern Mesopotamia after the cloud of death, the cloud of fallout from the bombs in the Sinai come over, and she doesn't want to leave her people. Bao doesn't want to leave her people, and it's the poetic language is not precise, but apparently she's caught in the aftermath of the war, in the radioactive fallout. Anyway, back then, she and Ninurta take over Lagash, and the decree in the Council of the Great Gods, the king, Gudea, builds the Girsu, an elaborate temple to mark Ninurta's ascension. This project deepens another rivalry, a sibling rift, because Ningish-Zida, son of Enki and rival of Marduk, is the one in charge of its construction. But Lagash has been a stable and important city for quite a while, and in this time develops further with new codes of justice and morals, enhanced military skills, a more delicate sculptural style, and a further refinement of Shuma's language. Ninurta gains the allegiance of rugged tribes in the mountains northeast of Lagash and provides them with horses for battle. The only time that there's any mention of humans that are not in the direct control of the Anunnaki in the Mesopotamian tablets is in connection with war. Like here, they ally with some tribes to the north and they supply them. So Inanna takes advantage of Ninurta's absence, returns to Uruk, and seizes power. She doesn't give up. At her direction, the king of the city takes up a weapon that was not to be touched without permission, having been granted by the circle of the high gods, and he falls dead, and her coup fails. Enlil issues a proclamation. Nannar, who's born on Earth, is to replace Ninurta, who was born on Nibiru. He is the one who's to get the rights of succession when Enlil passes on, which is who knows when that's going to be, because at that point he's been around for 400,000 years. Anyway, but the power of the gods over the human subjects is no longer quite so absolute, and that decree may have been meant to counter, but by giving the rights of inheritance to a God who was born on earth, that may be counter the allegiance that both Marduk and his son gained by taking human wives. Nanar makes Ur the capital of Sumer. That's in 2100 BCE. The city will dominate Sumer's final period of glory. On Enlil's order, Ur-Nammu, the king's rival, issues a new legal code with the intention of initiating a moral revival. Ur's infrastructure, cultural life, trade, and allegiance expand greatly. Now, the plot thickens. Nana repairs the damage in Nibriki remaining from Inanna's attack. His parents, Enlil and Ninlil, return there to live. Nana restores the edifices of the gods in other cities. Enlil gives Ur-Nammu, ruler of Ur, a powerful weapon and orders him to wage war on cities in the western portion of the realm, which, as a result of the diplomacy of Enki's son, have become allied under Marduk. I'm sorry, Marduk's son. But Ur-Nammu is killed in a chariot accident. And then the vessel returning his body to Ur sinks in a storm. Even more disillusioned than before, the people feel betrayed. If their great gods are all powerful, how can they allow such things to happen? So the authority of the lofty ones is now slipping and continues further to fade. So the human elite are readying themselves to step into the shoes of the gods. And then when the gods leave, the next act in the play begins. Lucky for us. Now Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's son, ascends the throne in Ur. He builds a shrine for Ninurta in Nibriki. He embarks on a long mission reaching the southern Sinai, builds altars and roads, including a route along the western shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, which becomes the Royal Road. He returns to Ur, where he succumbs to Inanna's charms, because she's not only a warrior, but she's a sex pot. There's a gesture that appears later in Western literature, but in several places in carvings, in Mesopotamian carvings, of Inanna lifting her skirt. You know, one of the famous ones, she does that for Gilgamesh, but he doesn't fall for her charms because, as he points out to her, none of her human lovers seem to survive very long. Anyway, she's quite put off by his refusal, but that's another story. Anyway, he returns to Ur, where he succumbs to her charms. He installs foreign troops in Larsa, 5 Canaanite cities loyal to Marduk. This is the beginning of the last big blow up. So these cities include Sodom and Gomorrah. They make a thrust that takes them close to the edge of Tillman, the spaceport in the middle of the Sinai. This is around 2050 BCE. You know, on orders from Nana, Shulgi sends mercenaries to suppress the 5 cities. And he builds a wall at the western edge of the Sumer to protect against forces loyal to Marduk. For his licentious existence in Ur with Inanna, and for abandoning the lands west of his wall, An and Enlil decree his death. So he is succeeded by his son, Amarsin, who establishes a residence in Eridu, the original settlement at the head of the Persian Gulf. Now, after 24 years in Egypt, Marduk comes back, enters Haran, which later is the city that Abraham takes off from. Okay, it's the western trading outpost of Ur, and he gets an important foothold in the northwestern extreme end of Mesopotamian world, and he sends his son Nabu to several Sumerian cities, wages war on Enlil, sacking his precinct in Nibriki, and Nabu travels to Canaan, seeking adherents there. War breaks out in 2040 BCE between the 5 Canaanite kings loyal to Marduk, son of Enki, and 4 Sumerian kings loyal to Enlil and to Inanna. This war is described in Genesis. It's the war of the kings of the west against the kings of the east. Marduk, as before, aims to conquer the central part of the Sinai, also known as El Paran, place glorified of the gods, El Paran, and with it the spaceport of Tilman. Tilman, meaning land of the missiles. His forces are stopped short of the goal. In a punitive response, Nabu city, Nabu is the son of Marduk, Borsippa, which is near Babili, which is Marduk's city, that's destroyed. This military campaign was the prelude to the disastrous Sinai War. Amarsin, leader of the allied kings of Sumer, sets sail from Eridu at the head of the Persian Gulf, intending to round the Arabian Peninsula and secure Tilman, the rocket base. But he's bitten by a scorpion and dies. His brother Shusin ascends the throne, rebuilds Enlil's precinct in Nibriki. Enlil and Ninlil return to dwell there. And as a reward, Ninlil gives Shusin a powerful weapon. He constructs a magnificent touring boat for the couple, but an effigy is found on board with an evil description, and they depart. Forces loyal to Marduk besiege several Sumerian cities. Shusin lengthens the defensive wall in the west. Shusin's successor, Ibisin, withdraws from the western portions of Enlil's domain under continued military pressure from Marduk. He bolsters the defenses of Ur and Nibriki. Shusin appoints himself the high priest of Inanna in Uruk and Ur. Omens of doom and destruction are cited frequently, including a lunar eclipse in 2031 BCE. Enlil's domain is weakening. Marduk's forces break through the western wall, and the cities immediately east of it come under his control. With these defeats, Nanar is discredited in the eyes of the people. Marduk's further advance eastward and east and southeast is brutal. Temples are defiled, including Enlil's lofty house in Nibriki. Ninurta accuses Marduk of that high crime, and Enlil returns in a rage, calls a council, and demands punishment for Marduk. The culprit is actually Marduk's brother and enemy Nergal, who's formed an alliance with Enlil's son Ninurta. And Nergal and Ninurta are the annihilators and scorchers, in the language of the tablets, who destroy the base in the Sinai and the 5 cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah. Enki stands up for his firstborn son, Marduk, whose claim, based in astrology, is that his time has come to become the ruler of all. And that's when that final war breaks out. So that's, that is the way we can put together about 1,500 years, of history, which seems to be typical of the entire span of Anunnaki rule. Reeve, if you were contributing something there, you're muted still. Let me see, maybe I can unmute you. Can you unmute yourself? Somehow you're muted. Ah, there you are.
Ah, I'm no longer, not that I have something so special to add. I'm following your line. I can identify with a lot of parts of it along the way, from, of course, your citations of biblical evidence and how things come together. Very, very good. I was thinking, though, of an essay I read by Mumford. Remember Lewis Mumford, the guy who used to write way back in the early days when I'm a kid? And he says that the gods wanted sacrifices. They offered sacrifices. Then they stopped offering sacrifices from their own tribe. And it occurred to them that God would be just as, this is Mumford, that God would be just as happy with the sacrifices of different tribes. So the tribe that would be offering to gods would go and raid other tribes, and vice versa. And that's what he says is the origin of war itself. That's what occurred to me. I wonder how, if any way it fits into your scheme. It probably does somehow.
In the deepest theme, that it was for the benefit of the gods, one way or another. That the war was to benefit the gods, but when you only have some facts and you don't have others, the story that you put together, has some validity, and then a lot of it is the best you can do, the best story you can put together. The way now that we have, I think, a bit more concrete facts, we can put together a somewhat better story for the sacrifices, like on the Temple Mount, the sacrifices of the burnt offerings, because if we take it back, the attendants of the gods were producing sumptuous meals for their lords. So they were cooking and roasting animals and all, so they provided deliciously, prepared meats for the gods, for the living gods. Then when their successors on Mount Moriah, on the Temple Mount, when their successors were serving an immaterial God, an unseen God, okay, it would be fitting that they offered that God not meat, but smoke. So they advanced, you might say, from cooking meat to burning it and giving the immaterial God smoke. So that that was the evolution of the sacrifice. But
and most of that was consumed by human beings. Some of it wasn't, apparently, and burned to a char, but most of it was simply eaten.
Well, it was given to the priests and given to the servants of the temple. So a whole lot of, as you know, a whole lot of, I forget which of the books, but it goes into the obligation of the other tribes to feed, what they had to do to feed the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites, who they weren't supposed to work. They were supposed to receive the tributes from the other tribes. But you know, people would, you know, like Mumford, you know, would do their best to put together a story that makes sense. As we started today with Tick and Isaiah Berlin, you know, they put together a pretty complete story, but it couldn't be totally complete because they didn't have the bright light that Sitchin shined, saying, hey, these gods were just like it says in the tablets. They were alive for a very, very long time, but they were alive. They walked on earth.
I think, if you allow me,
they gave us great gifts and great curses.
let me jump in here about something, if I could be a trifle personal about it. There's something much more destructive or deconstructive about the information suddenly late in my own life, a man approaching 90 years old, and now only recently do I discover our origins and how this all came about, and how this has to be part of how our worldview, how our worldview has to be looked at now that we understand, thanks to Sitchin, thanks to those who have developed this. But look, what's really goes on is something like this. Now, I'm writing a book on, I told you about, of course, victim blaming and blameless victims, studying Holocaust theology. And what do? I come across, well, a lifetime of study of the Jewish thinkers through the centuries, way back from wherever to Maimonides to Moses Mendelssohn, all the way to our time, and right up to Rosenzweig and Buber. You'd say to yourself, and of course Heschel and the other thinkers. And you say to yourself, good God, what would they be teaching? What would they be thinking had they been privy to this information? It's a kind of miracle for the people like myself who are getting into it, who understand how it is a little bit better. But all the thousands, all the decades of insights and intelligence that Jewish thinkers and philosophers have poured into Judaism, it has to be, how shall we say, in a polite way, reconsidered, because it cannot stand up in the face of what we know about gods and aliens and the existence of things we never knew about. It just does not hold up. And more than that, neither does Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche. I'm making very careful, how shall we say, of application of this knowledge to their work. And it's as though we've taken humanity down the wrong path altogether, all these centuries, with the how shall we say, with the bad tour guides from Aristotle, Plato, Moses, and the rest. We've been misled. We need a new pathway. And what do you do with all these great Jewish philosophers who have taught me and every one of my colleagues through the centuries? What the hell do you do? What the hell do you even say to them? What do I say to my class of NAOR, National Association of Retired Reform Rabbis? Big organization, a lot of Reform rabbis. I'd love to find some way to say, hello, you know what you could look into? You should look into this and that, and the Anunnaki and the aliens. You should look into that. First of all, I'll be laughed out. They won't read my other books any longer, because they'll think of me like they think of Velikovsky as a kook. But in reality, it's much more serious than even all of us are portraying, in the sense that so the great majority of Jewish religious thought, we call it theology, Jewish philosophy, if there is such a thing. But if whatever it is, it's based on fallacy, fallacious knowledge, the lack of the right information, because Buber would not speak in terms, neither would Rosenzweig, neither would the existentialist, neither would Borowitz. I don't know about Martin Cohn, the historian. I'm going to ask him someday, but he's well into his 90s. So, all right, I've had my little input here, but keep in mind how disconcerting it is for a rabbi who spent a whole lifetime in the company of the thinkers I just mentioned, has to reorganize his whole Weltanschauung in view of what we now know is the stuff that you portray, Mike Brenner. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, in the Mesopotamian literature, there was this dividing line. And they would later Mesopotamian literature, they would talk about everything that went on before the flood, and then everything that happened after the flood. There was this dividing line. Okay, so should humanity live so long? Should we survive the present crises and crises to come? There'll be a dividing line, before Sitchin and the diverted evolution hypothesis, all of the thinking of humanity before then, Aristotle, Maimonides, Buber, throw them all together, and it's not just the philosophers, but also a great deal of conventional science too, and then there's after this revelation.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that I don't think this revelation about the artificial genetic manipulation at the beginning of this particular species is going to happen by itself. In other words, that be the only major, revelation. I think it is accompanied by an understanding, an acceptance of what we might call the God of the gods. An understanding that I think the Anunnaki had of the all, of what Plato intuited as the all, whether you want to call it the Great Spirit or the One, there'll be a revelation that this is real. And that there's an entire, you might call, say, dimension, of manifest reality that mainstream thinking, has been blind to. That it's been accompanying along the way. There have been bubbling. So with Bergson. And with Mesmer, there have been bubblings of awareness of you might say the deeper or the overarching reality. There've been bubblings of it, just like there've been bubblings of indigenous life, indigenous thinking, coming back into Europe in the 17th and 18th century. There've been bubblings, so I think that's gonna happen at the same time. Not just this particular understanding of the genetic manipulation that was involved with with these two hominin species at different levels of development coming together artificially. At the same time, I think we've got to have an awareness that there's more to understanding the cosmos than that we've been there's more to it, and that I believe, it's my assumption, I guess, that we were kept from appreciating the all by the Anunnaki. That's one of the ways in which they have screwed us, is by standing in between us and the divine and saying, we're the divine, we're the gods, we're the ones to worship, because being in touch with the one would make them lesser, would make them less impressive, that's one way I put it together. It may not be all that accurate.
Well, and maybe they couldn't.
They couldn't, and you mean they had lost touch also?
Yeah. And
That could be. They were that because one of the things that happens when you are traumatized,
Right.
is that you lose your sense of unity with the all. That's true. You contract into a lesser spiritual being.
And so maybe in the process of creating us, I can never remember whose name is which, but the one that didn't like us, his objection to us.
Enlil.
No, the other one.
Enki made us.
Enki made us, and Enlil was the one. Okay. Maybe what he objected to about us was that we actually did have a heightened capacity to connect with the divine, and they wanted to see to it that wouldn't happen, and so the trauma was deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
Because trauma, you're right, trauma shuts off those channels, and it's self-perpetuating because traumatized parents traumatize their children.
Yes, and if we can try to get into Enlil's mind, when Enlil looked upon Homo erectus, and saw this primitive, to them, this primitive hominin in harmony with nature, happy, in the forests and savannas, he was looking back in time to his own primitive ancestors millions of years before.
But they're stuck, right? I mean, that's the idea that I get about them.
That he wanted to basically suppress or forget about his natural origins, and to invest totally in his very, very artificial, mechanized world.
Did I understand you right? You said that they did have a sense of the one, right? Am I right about that?
I think they did. I don't know. I don't know how they could have been astrologers without it. I don't, that's pretty wild, that I admit is total speculation on my part. How much contact they had, and how much they were divorced from cosmic contact, that I don't know.
Well, I think any species that spends as much time, and really, it sounds to me like their whole history is just about their wars with each other. I got to tell you, I find them incredibly boring.
Well, in 450,000 years on Earth, they accomplished nothing.
It's how it looks to me. And so I don't know that we are quite as trapped. We come close, but we do have the possibility that we could bypass them and connect to the one.
And,
And
and if we have any luck, we can make good use of the technical advance that we got from them. With any kind of luck. And I guess we don't know yet whether we are a lucky species or not.
I guess that's right.
Whether-
Yeah.
And that's having good fortune, having good fate. Apparently, when someone was proposed for advancement to a rank of general, Napoleon had only one question, for the sponsor, and that is he lucky?
Is he lucky? Oh, isn't that
Is he
interesting?
lucky? So are we lucky?
Are we lucky? Huh.
and-
Who knows?
And that's not yet decided, is it?
But doesn't it feel like the decisions are kind of up right now?
The question is certain. The question's certainly up, so many individuals are coming to a better place, a much better place in their lives, having passed through some very difficult experiences, very difficult times. This is this story is getting told in many individual ways right now, and maybe it's being told for the species as a whole. Through some very difficult times, we'll be coming to a better place. I would say God only knows, but I don't think that's even true. I think God, to use that term, is simply holding the question open.
You're off anyway.
Is holding the question open.
Yeah, that's how it seems to me too.
Mike, as a psychologist, as a clinician, what is the I don't want to say the standard or the generally recognized pathway for a patient to decrease an addiction to drama? Because I'm hearing your history, and I'm just hearing an addiction to drama, and we've picked up on it, and it's just like a constant soap opera on TV.
Well, yeah, addiction to excitement. Like like skydiving addicts, and skydiving enthusiasts.
Horse racing.
Horse race. Well,
Wars, just wars.
Addiction to war.
I
Absolutely.
mean, the whole war thing, the more I think about war, the more moronic it seems to me.
But-
And the fact that we're still doing it, it's almost incomprehensible.
Well, it doesn't go forward on the basis of a rational approach. So it being stupid or not doesn't make any difference. It grabs you, and it grabs the participants, and that's the problem.
It is our species. That's how we conduct the life of the species.
We're addicted.
We're addicted to it. It runs our lives. It seems we can't get from a generation to a next generation without killing each other in war. I mean, it's got to be something so deep within ourselves and society and in our makeup that we just can't keep away from it. There's nothing we can do about it except to be sucked into it all the time.
That
Oy
is very
vey.
pessimistic.
Oy vey. Yeah, that's
Oy vey.
that's fatalism, the worst kind of determinism you can think of. But tell me it's mistaken in some way.
Well, tell tell me, is there, yes, agreed that there is a loop we've been going around, but is there a possibility of escape? I guess that's where I am right now. And is my species capable of it?
Won't happen in my lifetime.
How much power is there in the truth will set you free?
But first it will make you miserable.
First it'll make you miserable. First it'll piss you off, first you will fight it, but if you connect with it, it changes things.
Well, Mike, I've been thinking a lot lately about my own obsession, which is viruses. And sometime if you guys want to hear about it, I'd love to tell you about it. But I think I think we've got viruses all wrong. We discovered them as a problem. They got defined as a problem. Nothing else has ever been considered about them. But if you take a look at the way that our world is put together and the biology of species on this planet, viruses are not only ubiquitous, but the more complicated the species, the more different viruses they have. And when you start to look even more closely, you start to see there's something that looks like cooperation. I mean, that was my entire career. So I get to say these things, even though it sounds crazy. But to me, I've got this young man I'm trying to hook into this idea. For me, if you want to go forward in this field, maybe the questions you ask, the way you approach it, depends on how you model it. And the minute I start thinking about experiments based on this idea, the whole world changes scientifically, okay? And the idea, it will kind of prove itself by its success, I think. So coming back to what we're talking about here, my sense is that if we look at ourselves from the true history of ourselves, then the way that the questions we ask and the solutions we come up with are going to be different. And if we're right, if this is right, if this is correct, we will know it by its success.
And if rethinking viruses, rethinking other microbiological entities, for example, without connection through the field, how could slime molds, which are totally undifferentiated cells, masses of cells that make this slime, how could a slime mold, without communication in the field between the undifferentiated little entities, how could the slime mold navigate a maze to find food, which it does?
Which it does.
Okay.
But not only that, but you can grind them up after
Right.
you've taught them the maze and feed them to other slime molds, and they will work the maze better too.
Yes.
Slime molds
Yes.
there's a lot of stuff that doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, it doesn't. So one of my thoughts is when I said this theory of diverted evolution isn't going to break through all by itself. If other paradigms start to fall, okay, then like I said, oh, wait a minute, we were wrong about the origin of life. It wasn't this wasn't this thing that could happen only when we didn't have oxygen in the atmosphere and there were lightning bolts. That's not the way it began. We rethink that whole thing. Then it becomes easier to rethink, events like the origin of human species.
Right. And I think, by the way, that what we have wrong is not that evolution doesn't happen, because of course it does, but that the origin of life didn't start here, that the universe peopled and that biology, I mean, they're finding bacterial spores on the outside of the space station. And I don't know why they're not they're not doing more research on that, but this goes back to the basic idea of panspermia, which is this idea that some biological materials can easily transverse space. And so biology is everywhere, you know, and similar in from one planet to another and stuff like that.
But of course, panspermia is not, you know, it's not an exclusive way of explaining the spread of life. You know, yes, it can, yes, primitive forms can transit the vacuum of space, but also primitive forms can arise from non-living matter.
That I'm not so convinced is as common.
I am, but that's another, you know, but okay.
I think that may be the rare event, not that once it gets started, it rolls.
Yeah.
But getting started is relative.
But see, then it begs the question: when and where did it start? I mean, what, where, what? Okay.
Honestly, that's too far away a question to worry about. I predict that when they finally collect up those samples from Mars and get them back here to test them.
Okay.
Bye, Jim. That they'll find that the molecules of life on that planet are very similar to the molecules of life on this planet. You know, life got started, it looks like very shortly after the planet got cool enough to support it. I mean, come on. It didn't start here. Yeah. So, and I think that's a paradigm that's going to fall hard, but I think it's going to fall.
You know, I would say, Linda, that it's yes, some forms may have fallen onto the cooling planet, and other forms may have, pardon the expression, spontaneously generated. You know, big.
I'll let you have that, but I would say the dominant amounts of life on this planet are just part of life everywhere. Yeah. But it's, yeah.
You know, I think this is a wonderful argument to have.
Yes, it is. And there will be an answer. The thing is, it will be not my lifetime, unfortunately. I won't live long enough to see this happen, but they will bring those samples back from Mars and they will look and see what's there. And I predict they're going to be convinced it was contamination because it's going to look so much like life here.
Yeah, and when there was this shot of Neil Armstrong on the moon, and he's surrounded by this immense blue halo, okay? They were impossible to say, well, that's his energy field that's illuminating. No, that's an optical effect, and it's the lenses doing this, that, other thing, you know? And it's just an artifact. It's not real, you know? So, yeah. The truth will set you free, but first it will tick you off. But before that, it has to be recognized. It has to be glimpsed.
Well, and it has to be used. Like I said, that's my idea, is that if we go, no, if we start from this basis, this is what the next step that in the treatment of human beings is going to be X, because our history is that. And I actually I can think a lot better about viruses.
All right. Well, we're gonna reserve some time next time on May the 2nd, first Monday in May. We'll have some virus time. Okay.
Really?
Okay. Time to take a break for a few weeks, and see you all. Thank you for being here, and see you again soon. And maybe in maybe there'll be just a measure less war going on and less horror going on in 4 weeks, maybe. Ain't gonna go away.
You know, a lot of it, of course, is that we've really never seen it like this in real time. I never have. Do you remember seeing pictures like this day after day after day?
There's a piece in today's Times that calls it World War Wired.
Friedman.
And I feel, and don't you feel like the whole world is sort of coming back around to, oh, we got to do better than this? I mean, I feel like
it could happen. It's certainly not, it's not a huge rush everywhere. But things, I think things, I'm hopeful for things over the next couple of years shifting as a result of this. It's like, oh, this is where it leads.
There was also, this just came out in the last like 24 hours, and there was a paper published. I've seen it in preprint form. I don't know where it was published, but somebody did a study where they took, and this was done in 2020, where they took real avid Fox News watchers, and they paid them $15 an hour to watch CNN for 7 hours a week. And they tested them for their extreme and erroneous views before and after. And it was remarkable.
Huh.
They changed their minds. That's not what I would have predicted, but that is what happened. I'll say, if you're interested, I'll send you the preprint. I've got it in a PDF. It's big and long, and I haven't read the whole thing yet. I've just read articles about it, but it's really real science. And I'm impressed and I'm excited because I want to send this to everybody I know that thinks they know things from watching Fox News.
Well, I'm hungry to see that. My first question is, were they randomly selected, or were there some pre-selection on the part of the volunteers? In other words, people who would be more open to doing that already. I'm just wondering how that cohort was set up.
I don't know I haven't read far enough to know what the placebo group did.
That's interesting. Okay. So yes.
So, but there's that gives me hope.
It does. Let me add. It does give me your hope, because I always thought that statement, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. That undermines that entirely, and I'm astonished to hear about it.
It suggests that things like, a lot of it had to do with what Fox News doesn't cover, is what I'm realizing. They don't talk about the 1 million people that have died of COVID in the United States. They don't, and so their omissions didn't, but on CNN, you hear about those things. And so I don't know enough about the details of it. Like I said, it's a big paper and it's going to be hard for me to read, but I'll send it to everybody if you want it.
I would like to see that.
Sure. But nobody was arguing with them. Nobody was trying to make them wrong.
No.
We're just saying, just listen.
Just listen. And we're going to pay you $15 an hour. In Georgia, that's twice the minimum wage, for heaven's sakes. Somebody, the comment on the article, first comment was, that just shows you got to pay people to watch CNN. Anyway, I thought that was good news and I wanted to share it.
Okay, spread it, send it, and I'll send it to the mailing list.
Well, I'll send it.
Oh, you've got the list. All right, you've got the list.
Unless I have the list, and if I have the list, I'll send it to everybody.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. Sorry I was late.
Till next time.